Welcome you to the opening press briefing of the 9th IAS Conference on HIV Science. It is also known as IAS 2017. My name is Linda-Gail Bekker. I'm the current president of the International AIDS Society and the International Scientific Chair of the conference. I'm joined, of course, by my co-chair, Jean-François Delfraissy, and I'll be introducing the panel in a moment. This conference is organized by the International AIDS Society in partnership with the ANRS, the French National Agency for Research on AIDS and Viral Hepatitis. And of course, I'm very pleased to share this platform with Jean-François tonight. I'd also like to welcome our other distinguished guests and panelists and thank them for joining us. Of course, Ambassador Debbie Birx, very nice to have you, Giovanna Rincon, and Michel Sidibé. We'll hear from each of them in a moment. Please note that this briefing is being live streamed on the IAS 2017 virtual conference page, and an archived recording will be available after this. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to those of you who will be joining us from around the world. Before handing things over to my colleagues, I just want to make a few brief observations and tell you what the rest of the media week looks like. Of course, in the past decade, we've seen what I would describe as remarkable, tremendous advances in the fight against HIV. We heard this week from Michel's team that more than 19 million people are now on life-saving treatment, and new prevention options are helping us to really move towards ending transmission around the world. But the important part and the common denominator that has made these advances possible, of course, is science and discovery. Science is the reason we've made such remarkable progress, and applied science is what we believe will actually bring an end to this epidemic. And that's why this conference is so important. We put enormous emphasis on science. The IAS Conference on HIV Science is the world's largest open scientific meeting on HIV. And you will see this week more than 6,000 professionals from around the world congregate here to discuss more than 1,700 new studies. I have personally seen a good number of these abstracts, and I can tell you that the caliber of the research that we'll be sharing this year is really spectacular. I've no doubt that the collective power of this cutting-edge research will make us move forward in giant leaps. In our press briefing tomorrow morning, we'll be featuring some of those new advances and really showing the depth and the breadth of the kind of science you'll be seeing this week. In Tuesday morning's press briefing, we'll highlight progress in identifying new HIV prevention tools and new science that improves our understanding of how we can best use those tools and deploy them and scale them up. The conference will also shed light on the urgent need for new approaches to bring HIV prevention and treatment to young people and vulnerable populations at high risk for HIV. And these, of course, include our key populations, men who have sex with men, transgender people, people who inject drugs, people who are incarcerated, and sex workers. In closing, the other, I think, sobering note that I think you will hear a lot about at this conference is that in order to do this work, we need to see continued funding stream. Global funding for HIV has declined in recent years, and we know that today major donors around the world are contemplating severe cuts to the funding that needs to come in. I'm pleased to say that this week, we will show what investment in this epidemic can do. And I think this is an important message to get out. The money is not being wasted. It is saving lives and it's putting an end to the epidemic as we know it. But we need that money to keep flowing. In this week, we will provide HIV scientists from around the world the opportunity to join together to herald the pivotal role of science in the fight against HIV, and of course to call for their continued support for research and the support of funders, specifically for science, because without science we won't maintain the progress, without the progress we won't move towards containment of this epidemic. So this is not the last time you'll be hearing from me, and I look forward to addressing you all a little bit later today. But now I'd like to hand over to my conference co-chair, Jean-François Delfraissy. Jean-François is the director of the ANRS. He has been for the last 12 years and really has been very instrumental in putting France out there as a leader in HIV research. Jean-François.
Thank you very much, Linda-Gail, and bienvenue à Paris pour tous. And we can anticipate a very great conference in the next week. HIV Science come back to Paris after 14 years, because 14 years ago we organized the same conference with Michel and Françoise Barré-Sinoussi, and it was a great moment to create, not ready to create, but to create also the Global Fund at that time. And a lot of politicians were there, Nelson Mandela, and Jacques Chirac too. And it was really a great moment. During these 14 years, France has been at the front of HIV science, but not only HIV science, but also as a second donator for the Global Fund. And in HIV science, Françoise Barré-Sinoussi received the Nobel Prize. And I think that IAS, the French National Agency for Research on AIDS and Hepatitis, was also in good situation to create innovation in research. Just some words about we have been involved in the first clinical trial for circumcision, but also when to treat with the temporary trial in developing countries, and we also described in some patients that we call controllers patients. We also have been involved in the PrEP and the prevention trial with the PrEP and the intermittent PrEP à la demande with the recent trial IPRG conducted by Jean-Michel Molina, and also in a test and treat with a large collaboration from François Dabiz, the new director of the NRS, with colleagues from South Africa. If I have some vision about what will happen in the next year, we have 3 goals in research. The first one is cure, functional cure, viral eradication. The second one is vaccine, because we need vaccine and for prevention, and but also to vaccine as for treatment. And finally, we need more and more on prevention and innovation in prevention. And a lot of these topics will be discussed during the next week. To go forward on these 3 goals, clearly we have to done some choice, probably at a high level on what we think about the research and the institutional research. And clearly we have 2 priorities. The first one is basic science. We have to come back to basic science. We need basic science for a lot of reasons. And the second one is implementation science with a large collaboration with NGOs. I have to say nothing about clinical science. Clinical science is quite important. INRS has been involved in clinical science, but my vision is clearly for again basic science and implementation science. And my final remark will be a lot of things has been done during the last 14 years. We have also to note that HIV science brings a lot of things in infectious disease in general. For example, a lot of things for Ebola, for Zika, for hepatitis C and B, for TB, for drug discovery, and for also innovation in testing, etc., etc. And nobody remember what we have done, but we have done also a lot of things outside of the HIV field. However, we have to move forward, because for a lot of reasons, and we have to move with a global vision on global health. And I think we have no choice at that time. HIV science and the HIV community have great success, but it's a time to move, and Paris will be the conference of a first step to move forward for the global health.
Thank you, Jean-François. Next, it's my great pleasure and honor to introduce Ambassador Debbie Birx, the director of PEPFAR. And Ambassador Birx and her team has done extraordinary work, and I must say, as someone coming from Southern Africa, PEPFAR has been extraordinary for us, and the generosity and also that of the Global Fund has revolutionized the history of the people in Southern Africa. So thank you to PEPFAR. Through PEPFAR, we've seen what can be achieved, and I think again you'll see this week what can be achieved when nations and donors come together to direct meaningful resources towards ending AIDS. So over to you.
Thank you, and thank you, Linda-Gail and Jean-François, and really congratulations for putting together an extraordinary meeting that kicks off tonight, and really to the International AIDS Society for your strong work, not only in these venues, but all through the year, and the impact you have had. I think Jean-François just clearly covered one of the huge and most important issues of why this is a critical moment, talking about cure, talking about vaccine. But the other piece of this is having the scientific evidence and translating those tools and evidence into the field. And that's what PEPFAR and Global Fund have the privilege to do. And I think the breakthrough that you will see at this conference is really clear documented evidence that those programs, when in the field and implemented with communities and governments, that were having a tremendous impact on the ground, not only saving people's lives, but changing the very course of this pandemic. And I think when the Kingdom of Swaziland reports tomorrow on their FIO, what we call this assessment of how we're doing at the community level with HIV/AIDS, you'll see this dramatic impact. You'll see a time where just a few years ago, highest burden, and where we're at a different place today. And this is because we're able to take those scientific discoveries and put them in the field in a very real way, meeting people's needs where they are. And that's what the privilege of working for the United States government and being part of PEPFAR, to see that translation of the US taxpayer dollars into communities and into clients to change their lives, the lives of the communities, and the lives of countries. And I think we're privileged to be part of that. These surveys also point out very clearly to us where we're not doing well as a group, and I think that has been incredibly helpful. We can see that less than 35-year-old men don't know their HIV status. Those and younger. 25-year-old women and younger don't know their status, over 50% of the time. So when you look, I always call it the tyranny of averages, when you look at the country level and you look at the summary of the graphs, you can look quite good. But then when you look and make sure that you're reaching everybody, that 90-90-90 and the translation of the vision of UNAIDS down to the community, you see the gaps in who you're not reaching, the gaps in the key populations, the gaps in young women, the gaps in young men. And that allows us then to really direct our resources in very real ways and very tangible ways, and quarterly analyze the data to really see whether we're reaching those individuals. It has allowed us to put our DREAMS program in the field, which is determined, resilient, empowered, AIDS-free, mentored, and safe young women, really a prevention program addressing the structural issues that put young women at 5 to 14 times more risk for HIV. It's allowed us to focus our young men's prevention in very real ways to have an impact. And through the data and through the use of that data in a very granular way, utilizing implementation science, has allowed us to focus our resources in a way that together we're changing the course of this pandemic. And so what we once thought was impossible is now becoming possible. When we think back to when you had the last meeting here, less than 3 million people on treatment in the entire world, and we were talking about 19 million. That does not happen by chance. It happens by dedicated communities, dedicated governments, and resources together to have this level of impact. So thank you for your interest. Please keep talking about HIV/AIDS and the progress and how we have a chance to change the future for all future generations.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, and thank you for being with us here in Paris. Our next speaker is Giovanna Rincon, co-founder and president of the Paris-based Transgender Rights Association ACCEPTESS-T. Ms. Rincon has been a tireless advocate working to ensure that transgender people have access to HIV education, prevention, treatment, and care. And I'm very pleased to have you here with us tonight. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Hello, I am Giovanna Rincon. I am transgender, HIV positive, and sex work activist. Today, I represent the key population. In 2010, I co-founded an organization called the ACCEPTESS-T on a sample but necessary assessment, lack of an understanding of transgender reality by doctors, lack of representation of transgender people in the health system, absence of transgender issues in the political debate, criminalization of transgender people because of their residence status or of sex work. I realized quickly that transgender reality were quite similar to a lot of other vulnerable communities in terms of consideration by the medical community and police repression. Trans women, quality of life is the best indicator of the respect and inclusion shown to key population by public policies and research. Health is first and foremost a question of rights, and criminalizing sex workers put us all in danger, making us insecure and more vulnerable to violence and infection. 30 years ago, a group of HIV activists launched what science became our motto, nothing about us without us, and led the way to making huge progress in research and care with the Denver principles. We are trying to modernize these principles today and adapt them to new challenges in research and the fight against AIDS by introducing the Paris Community Declaration. This declaration represents our new agenda for key population and their central position in the fight against epidemics. Here are our main demands. That government must utilize the United Nations platform to condemn policies and practices that criminalize or stigmatize the key population and other protection to all key population, while they promote policies change. That key population group need to benefit from biomedical approach like TASP and PrEP, combination prevention, increased research and HIV prevention and treatment, and a differentiated rights-based approach to addressing HIV through a global key population advocacy agenda. That key population representative must be included in research ethical committee, community-based research must be supported, and research outcome must be shared with the community involved. That contribution from developed countries to the global fund must increase, in line with the UNAIDS goal of ending the epidemic by 2030. That the pharmaceutical industry must establish a fair system on patent rights that enables early access to innovative drugs for countries that are unable to afford patented medicines. We key population and people living HIV are dramatically in need of political will and a strong commitment to end the epidemic, especially by the rich countries. In the past, France was leading the political and financial mobilization against AIDS at the international level. But today, where is France? Where is the political courage? Where is Monsieur Macron? President Macron, don't make the epidemic great again. Thank you for you.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'd like to call on now our final speaker, a champion of our cause, Michel Sidibé, Executive Director of UNAIDS. Of course, as I just mentioned a few days ago, Michel and his colleagues released the latest data on the state of the global HIV epidemic, and I think Michel will be sharing some of that and the progress towards 90-90-90.
Thank you very much, Linda. Let me thanks also Jean-François. I think what you're doing is great, bringing all of us for this conference and this defining moment is very critical. And this table is clearly demonstrating what means responding to AIDS. It is not about disease, it is about people-centered. We are seeing science, we are seeing funders, we are seeing community and UN together, and we are seeing also press in this room. So I think for me, what I can just say that we are breaking the backbone of this epidemic. And it is a moment we should never let go. It is a moment for winning. It is not the moment for losing. And I want to say that very strongly because Jean-François was talking about 2003. We were here. And in 2003, I will repeat it again, we had only 4% of people on treatment. People who need treatment, badly needed treatment, 4% of people. And it was not more than 50,000 people in Africa. And today, this report is showing clearly that we have more than 19 million people on treatment, 19.5. That we have been able to cover, to put even 2.4 million people in only 1 year. That's all is showing clearly that we are trying to demonstrate that we have return on investment. It's not just resources mobilized without result. We are producing result. And it's not just about coverage. It is about impact. I know that donors, they don't pay attention too much of coverage. They want to see impact. And today, we can say from this report that we have been able to reduce by more than 50% the death rate, mortality rate amongst people living with HIV. That is amazing. Is translated in many places, I can tell you today, by an increase in life expectancy. Linda is better place. You talk about southern part of Africa. We're talking about 48 years old life expectancy. Even in some places like Botswana, it was 39 going to 39. Botswana is over 60 today. In average, we are above 58. Is a gain of almost 10 years in the last 10 to 12 years. It's just important to share those information. And also, we are seeing a reduction amongst children transmission. We call for elimination and keeping mother alive. We are saying really that we are winning there, countries after countries. You take more than 5 countries in southern part where epicenters, country like South Africa, 70,000 babies just few years back. Not 5 years, 70,000 babies born every year. Today, we are close to 3,000. So we are seeing 95%, I said 95% of the pregnant women who are HIV positive on IRT. So we are doing, really, we are demonstrating that this global solidarity is working. We have gaps. To say that we don't have gaps will be being complacent. And I said that the worst conspiracy will be complacency. And I have to repeat that again because we are saying, unfortunately, that we have 1.2 million children who are not on treatment. They need treatment today, they don't have treatment. We still have 17 million people waiting for their treatment. They don't have treatment. And we are seeing that in Eastern Europe, Central Asia, we are not winning. We still have a 60% increase of new infection during the last 6 years. 81% of those are in only Federation of Russia. And we are seeing that 80% of the new infection is occurring among key population. I'm talking about a gay population, people who inject drugs, sex worker, prisoner, out of Africa, 80% of a new infection. So we need to pay attention to bad laws. We need to pay attention to laws which are criminalizing. We need to pay attention to prejudice. We need to pay attention to stigma, discrimination. It's impossible to end this epidemic without addressing that. And finally, I want to say that West Africa and Central Africa is lagging behind. Even with the push with Médecins Sans Frontières and all of us, we still are saying that they don't even have 35% of the people in need of treatment on treatment. We know that they have a financial gap of $1.9 billion. So, and if we don't address those gaps, and we will be not able, unfortunately, to go with the same speed. And we need the same speed. And any cut, I said that any cuts to funding will jeopardize our result. I want to say that we have 7 billion gap, and we are seeing growing investment on domestic funding. Domestic funding is increasing when we are seeing donor funding declining. And if this trend is maintained, I think we will jeopardize our result. Thank you.
Thank you, Michel. So now is the time for questions from the floor. If you'd like to ask a question, please line up at the microphones, I think, where they are, here. And when I note you, if you could just say which institution you represent and to whom your question is directed.
I've asked this in other formats before. I'm Ben Ryan from Pause Magazine, but I guess to the ambassador and to Sidibé, if essentially part of the 90-90-90 goals is a pitch for money, and we're seeing flat funding or perhaps declining funding from the major donors, can one say that in that sense they were a failure?
Start.
Oh, you want me to start?
Yes. Then I can follow you.
Great. Well, I think the United States from the beginning has been a leader in funding the HIV/AIDS response, and we maintain that depth of commitment to the HIV/AIDS response. And we have continued to expand our programs and accelerate our programs in partnership with governments and communities. So I think and you can see from my being here, that we're still deeply committed to responding to this pandemic. Michel.
It's a very important question because we need to be very transparent. If we don't continue to have the necessary funding, I think the most vulnerable will suffer. The countries who will have certainly less disparities, less inequities, will continue to maintain even reach in 2030 the goal of ending AIDS as a public health threat. But unfortunately, like I said, it's not all the countries who will be able to do that. Even the countries who are doing a major effort today, South Africa is putting almost $2 billion from their own budget. They cannot do it alone. You cannot put 7 million people on treatment and thinking that it will happen without a shared responsibility. We need to continue to advocate for global solidarity, sustain global solidarity, and share responsibility.
Sure.
Thank you. Mariette Leroux, I'm with Agence France Presse. I have a question, please, for Linda-Gail and for Michel, and whoever would like to comment on it. It's also about the money. Are you making an official appeal here today to the US government as the major donor to HIV programs to reconsider or not to go ahead with President Trump's proposed cuts? And also to Ambassador Birx, how concerned are you about the proposed freeze on the PEPFAR funding? What do you foresee the effects of that will be, and is it something that worries you? Thank you.
So, Mariette, most certainly, thank you. I think we've heard from the White House questions of, or certainly suggestions of cuts that sound like they could seriously jeopardize the response to the epidemic. And at a time when it is such a critical moment, I feel like the stars are aligning for us to move into the second era of really beginning to move towards, closing down certainly epidemics in different regions of the world and working towards an end to this epidemic. This is a disastrous time to see not only flatlining, but actually reduction in funds when the treatment pool is growing, there is prevention to put out there, and we have less time than we've had these 30 years to really move in this direction. So most certainly, I see this conference as an opportunity to shine a light on this is a time to stay fully engaged. And I think we understand the American people are a major funder in this, and we need them to stay engaged. Michel, I don't know if you want to add anything.
I want just to say that I came from Washington. I met senators, Congress from both sides. I met citizens of U.S. I can just say that is bipartisan. People are very, very seriously backing this program. They believe that AIDS program, PEPFAR programs, and particularly the response we have been able to demonstrate over the years, we should not lose it. But at the same time, it's very genuine question people were asking me, how we will sustain those gains over the years? And we all collectively need to ask ourselves this question. It is a very important question. We need to start thinking about the transition plan, sustainability transition plan. If not, we cannot continue to believe that the fund will continue to come years and after years.
Just a comment. I think the problem is the same in Europe and probably also in France for the next years. We have also to be clear. We have a lot of great success, and I think that politicians can understand that. But I think it's not sufficient. And clearly, also Michel, we have discussed about that.
Yeah.
We have to create a new idea and to found and the innovation not only in science and in basic science, but also innovation to speak with the politician, because we have spent about now 15 years and it works very well. After that, probably some people say, okay, it's a lot of work, it's a lot of money, and we have now also other issue on climate, etc., and also in health system. So clearly we have to be very clear about that.
Do you want to say anything, Ambassador?
I just add two things. One, the United States is still deeply committed to the Global Fund and ensuring that 2-to-1 match in the Global Fund. So in order to mobilize additional U.S. government resources towards HIV, TB, and malaria, increasing contributions to the Global Fund are absolutely essential. And it's our job to translate whatever funding we get from Congress and the President into the most impactful programs we can do. And I think that's what we've done in a very dedicated and clear way. And I think Michel is right. We have unbelievable bipartisan support.
Yeah.
Sometimes if you watch American TV, you don't sense it, but it's very deep and it's very continuous. The deep support for these programs in global health in HIV, TB, and malaria.
So I'm just going to repeat that because that needed to be into a microphone. So Mariette's asking what will the potential PEPFAR cuts mean on the ground, and I think the question was directed at Ambassador.
Yes, thank you. I think you see the very first line in the PEPFAR budget in the President's request was an absolute requirement to maintain services to those we're serving, recognizing our commitment to the orphans and vulnerable children services, to our treatment services, to our PMTCT services. And I think there's a deep commitment to continue those. In fact, that's a requirement in the PREPFAR budget. So I think what you're asking for is what is the potential for expansion? And until we see how we perform in our country operational plans of 17, which launched 1 October, and when you see the Kingdom of Swaziland's data, you will see how we're accelerating to a very different place together. And I think that's the data we're waiting to look at to really be able to speak to the question that you've asked.
Any other questions? Seeing none, I'll call it an end to today's press conference. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us. We really appreciate your continued support. We can't do this without you, and we look forward to seeing you during the week. I want to thank each of the press panelists here, and hope you will have a great conference. Thanks for being here. Nice to see you, Mariette. So great.